The Devotions of St. Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury, created by St. Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury, born 1033, died 1109, edited by Clement C.J. Webb, M.A., Fellow of St. Mary Magdalene College, published by Methuen and Company, 36 Essex Street, London, 1903. Introduction. The life of St. Anselm is well known. It belongs to the history of England. By nature a recluse and a thinker, he was called upon to play an active part in political life under circumstances of great difficulty. In the midst of these he bore himself with a conscientious uprightness, a quiet dignity, and a persistency in the refusal to sacrifice principle to expediency, which justified those who called him against his will to the throne of Canterbury. But his heart was elsewhere, in that passionate search for the innermost meaning of his religious belief, of which the history of the Church affords no more striking example than his. The quarrels about investitures, about his relations of church and state, of pope and king, which distracted his outward life in his later years, have left no trace in his writings. In a selection from these, intended to form part of a library of devotion, we need not dwell long upon them. The only one of the works here translated, the date of whose composition is known to us, was written before Anselm was archbishop, while he was still living in the seclusion of his abbey at Bec in Normandy. Even of this earlier part of his life, information is so ready to hand that I do not propose to give here more than a very brief account of it. The following outline will be sufficient to inform the reader what manner of man the author was, whose devotions are put before him. Anselm was born in 1033 at Aosta in Piedmont, a Burgundian city of Roman origin, governed by its own prince-bishops and lying at the Italian end of the road over the pass of the great St. Bernard. Both his parents were of noble rank, and his mother, Ermenberga, was a kinswoman of the Counts of Maurienne, from whom the House of Savoy, who now sit on the throne of Italy, are descended. A pious and studious boyhood, during which he twice begged for admission to the monastic life from an abbot of his acquaintance, who twice refused him for fear of offending his father, was succeeded by a time in which indulgence in the pleasures of youth diverted him from more serious courses, and called down upon him, after the restraining influence of his mother had been withdrawn by her death, the undiscriminating indignation of his father. Finding that nothing he could do availed to win back his father's favor, he at last turned his back upon home and kindred, and with one attendant set out across the Mont Cenis to seek a new career beyond the Alps, and so came at last to Bec, drawn by the fame of his countryman, the Lombard scholar Lanfranc of Pavia, then a monk at Bec, afterwards Archbishop of Canterbury, and chief counselor of William the Conqueror. He was himself professed in the same monastery, being now 27 years of age, and soon, in 1063, succeeded Lanfranc, who was then promoted to be abbot of Duke William's newly founded Abbey of St. Stephen at Keene, in the office of prior, in which capacity he was, owing to the great age of the founder abbot Herwin, the principal governor of the society. In 1078, Herwin died, and Anselm was elected his successor. The conquest of England by the Norman Duke William in 1066 had brought with it an accession to the abbey of property in that country, which it became the duty of Anselm occasionally to visit. On one of these visits, it was that he persuaded his old master, Lanfranc, who in 1070 had been raised to the Archbishopric of Canterbury, of the propriety concerning which Lanfranc had doubted, of recognizing as a martyr his predecessor Alphege, who had been put to death by the heathen Danes, not expressly for refusing to deny the faith of Christ, but because he would not suffer his flock to be impoverished by providing a ransom for him. Anselm, we are told, defended the right of Alphege to the glorious title of martyr as one who had died for righteousness, as the Baptist for truth, and therefore both alike for Christ, who is very truth and very righteousness. The visits of Anselm to England led to his being held in great reverence there, and at last to his name being pressed upon the conqueror's son and successor, William Rufus, when terrified by a sickness thought to be mortal into a resolution of filling the vacant primacy, which since Lanfranc's death in 1089 he had kept vacant in order to enjoy its revenues. This was in the spring of 1093, and in December of that year, Anselm, who much against his will had accepted the king's nomination, was consecrated to the see of St. Augustine. From this time onwards, his life was one long struggle in defense of ecclesiastical rights and liberties against the masterful sons of the conqueror. A very few words on the controversy respecting investitures must suffice in this place, but a few are needful because Anselm's part therein may sometimes alienate from him the sympathy of those in our days who do not comprehend what was thought to be at stake. As with many of the important struggles of history, an external consideration of this controversy suggests that it was trivial and vexatious, and it is necessary to enter into the point of view of an age very different from our own to understand its true inner nature. No doubt the conferring of certain ornamental symbols of the ecclesiastical dignity is a matter which by itself seems hardly worth the public distress which ensued from the quarrel concerning it. No doubt the predecessor of Anselm had accepted investiture from the predecessor of William Rufus, and the conqueror had exercised with the consent of Lanfranc, and without the active interference even of so energetic a pope as Gregory VII, himself the famous Hildebrand, privileges the right to which Anselm would not recognize in the conqueror's successors. No doubt, as had been pointed out, the Roman See ultimately conceded all over Europe to Christian principles, in substance if not in form, what was refused to them by the popes during the quarrel of the 11th and 12th centuries. Did then Anselm waste his life on an unimportant contest? I think not. If some of the most enlightened minds of those times took uncompromisingly the Roman side in the quarrel, undeterred very often by a clear perception that the actual policy of the Roman See was often inconsistent and even venal, it was what they saw in the independence of the ecclesiastical order under its Roman chief, the security, and the one security for the maintenance of the Christian moral code in a half-barbarous age of violence and sensuality. The feudal customs of the European nations, however, deeply modified by Christian influence, rested on no intelligible Christian or even rational principle, and so not only the canon law but the Roman civil law also, with its claims to rationality and universality, might well seem sacred and divine in contrast to the chaotic common law of the nations. Thus, in the next century, after Anselm's, the great scholar John of Salisbury could compare the sin of King Stephen in suppressing Vicarius's lectures on the Roman law in England and in confiscating Archbishop Theobald's copy of Justinian with the impieties of Isaiah and Antiochus Epiphanes. There was no guarantee that a king would uphold the moral law of Christendom, or William the Conqueror, who, for all his masterfulness, cared above all things for the authority and effectiveness of the church in his dominions, might be succeeded by a reckless and godless son like William Rufus, whereas, though the series of popes would no less display inequalities of moral excellence, the whole raison d'etre, as we say of a pope's position, whatever his personal character, was that of the upholder of the Christian law. It rested ultimately not, like a king's, on force, but on general veneration for Christianity, however imperfectly understood. The example of the subjugation of the Church at Constantinople to the civil power was a warning not to be forgotten against a like submissiveness in the West. We must not forget, moreover, that the people often recognized the cause of the clergy and the Church as their own, as that of the oppressed against the oppressor. This was probably the secret of Becket's popularity, which had nothing to do, as the French historian Augustin Thierry supposed, with a Saxon origin which was not his, and the like popularity attended Anselm, who was not even born in the country. Thus, on occasion of a demonstration of popular sympathy with him, Adamer, his biographer, observes, "We rejoiced therefore and took heart, trusting that, as the Scripture saith, the voice of the people is the voice of God." Thus much I have said about the controversy concerning investitures, because the quarrel about the rights of king and pope occupied so important a place in Anselm's life that some understanding of that quarrel is indispensable to a sympathetic appreciation of the man. In 1097, Anselm, against the will of the king, but as he conceived, in accordance with his duty, left England to visit the Pope, Urban II, who received him with great honor and carried him with him the following year to the Council of Bari, where Anselm disputed against the representatives of the Greek Church on the doctrine of the procession of the Holy Ghost, as to which, in consequence of his work, addressed to Pope Urban on the Trinity and the incarnation of the Word, he was already reckoned a high authority, and on which he afterwards composed an important treatise, which we still possess. In 1099 he was present at another council at Rome, where severe censures were pronounced against those who, being laymen, gave or who received from laymen investiture with ecclesiastical office. Anselm, with his already high notions of papal authority, was by his assent to the decrees of this council plunged deeper than before into the controversy of which I spoke above. He had quarreled with William Rufus, mainly because he held that it was his right and duty to recognize the authority of him whom he judged the lawful pope in England, apart from any royal recognition, while the king, taking advantage of the circumstance that there were two claimants of the Roman see, maintained that the recognition of his dominions of any particular person as pope belonged to the royal prerogative. He had not hitherto objected to all investiture with ecclesiastical office by laymen, and had himself done homage to William Rufus for the Archbishopric of Canterbury, as Lanfranc had done to the Conqueror. But now, when recalled by Henry I, on William's death in the year after the Council of Rome, 1100, he refused this homage, and in 1103 left England again to take counsel of Urban's successor, Pascal II. He was reconciled with Henry, who was not, like his brother, a hater and willful oppressor of the Church, in 1106, partly through the mediation of Adela, Countess of Blois, the king's sister and mother of his successor Stephen, one of many devout women of rank, among whom Henry's own queen, Maud, must be reckoned, who were profoundly attached to Anselm as a spiritual guide. He returned to England in 1107, died on April 21, 1109, at Canterbury, and was buried in his cathedral church next to the tomb of his master, friend, and predecessor, Lanfranc. Such is the bare outline of this great man's life, of the beauties of his character, his self-devotion, his gentleness, his equanimity, his kindliness, and tolerance. I have said nothing. They will be found set forth in the contemporary Latin life by Edemer, with a charm that only an admiring friend can give to the story of one he has known and almost worshipped. For modern biographies of Anselm, I would refer to the French scholar Charles de Ramosat's lucid and thoughtful monograph, Anselm de Canterbury, to the full and learned, if somewhat diffuse and fanciful work of Mr. Martin Rule, Life and Times of St. Anselm, to Dean Church's well-known sketch, to the careful article by Dean Stevens in the Dictionary of National Biography, and the charmingly written chapter by Mr. J.R. Green in his Short History of the English People. The first treatise of Anselm's, which I have chosen to translate, is the greatest of all his works, the Proslogion, as he called it, or Address to God, in which he sought to show how by one irrefragable argument the being of God could be demonstrated against all who should say with the fool in the Psalms, "There is no God." It was not without much hesitation that I included the Proslogion in this selection, for it deals with an abstruse subject matter, and though it deals with it in a style singularly simple and almost wholly free from technical expression, it is beyond doubt difficult to understand without a considerable effort of attention and thought. But it seemed to me that no selection from Anselm's devotional works could be considered representative which did not include this very remarkable writing. For the justification of including Anselm among the masters of devotional literature lies in this, that no one has ever more strikingly shown how the disinterested search for metaphysical truth can be offered as a service of passionate devotion to God. The saying of Hegel, Das Denken ist auch getestet might be the motto of the most part of Anselm's writings. The more richly endowed and many-sided intelligence of Augustine, in virtue of the very variety and breadth of its interests, illustrates less remarkably than that of Anselm, the saint as philosopher. The story of Anselm's deathbed tells its own tale of the dominance of speculative interest in his spiritual life. Palm Sunday had dawned, so Edemer reports it, and we were sitting round him according to our custom. One of us therefore said to him, Lord and Father, we understand that you are leaving the world and going to your Lord's Easter court. He answered, If indeed this is his will, I will gladly obey his will. But if he should rather please that I should still remain among you at least long enough to be able to finish the working out of a problem, which I am revolving in my mind concerning the origin of the soul, I could gratefully accept it, in that I know not whether any will finish it when I am gone. The Proslogion, the principal monument of such a character, may thus be regarded as a work of high devotional as well as high philosophical value. As a work of devotion, it seemed to me not to need an elaborate philosophical commentary. I have, however, added in a supplementary note some few observations upon the reasoning which it contains. The reader who cares enough for metaphysical speculation to follow them with attention will not fail to go further. It is probably true that the ontological argument, as the argument of the Proslogion afterwards came to be called, is open to objection in the form which Anselm gave to it, and that, even if it does prove something, it does not prove all of which Anselm intended it to prove. The contemporary criticism of the monk, Juanilo, in his Apology for the Fool, Anselm, himself answered in a treatise which is a model at once of metaphysical acuteness and of controversial courtesy, Kant's criticism of the same argument, as it was revived at the inauguration of modern philosophy by Descartes, is a graver matter, and, however we may think that Kant may be answered on this point or on that, no doubt he showed the bankruptcy of all merely logical arguments to prove the existence of God, of religion. But the devotional value of the Proslogion does not stand or fall with the adequacy or inadequacy of the argument it contains. A perception of the inadequacy of the argument may even lend it a greater devotional value. Devout persons will often welcome a supposed proof of the truth of what they believe, less because they need proof for themselves than because they wish to be able to silence objectors. And if only the objectors are silenced, they are often not very careful to examine too closely the means by which it is done. Thus they fall into the error of the scholasticism which roused the indignation of Bacon, the scholasticism which seeks not the truth, but only the refutation of an opponent. They became impatient with the philosophical inquirer who has an eye for difficulties and is never done grubbing up the roots of his convictions. And the philosophical inquirer is apt on his side to fall out of sympathy with the devout, and all the more so if they adorn their doctrine with the language of a philosophy, which is to them no more than apologetics. In Anselm's Proslogion, however, he will not find apologetics but genuine inquiry. Yet this inquiry is conducted in a spirit of the most profound devotion. This may seem a strange claim to make for a treatise whose alternative title is Faith in Search of Understanding, and which contains the famous saying, Credo ut intelligam, I believe in order that I may understand. Is not this the very opposite of free inquiry, to make faith the starting point? I do not think so. The philosophy of religion is as little attainable without a religious experience, which the philosopher first has and then endeavors to understand, as a philosophy of aesthetic without an experience denied to one who is unsusceptible to the beauty of nature and of art. It is this living religious experience, rather than merely the acquiescence in an authoritative dogma, that Anselm has in view when he speaks of faith. No doubt to him, living in an age when only one creed was practically presented to his mind, the distinction between these two meanings of faith was not obvious as it is to us. But I do not believe that an acquaintance with the writings of Anselm at first hand will allow a candid reader to see in him a mere apologist. He has much of the same originality and independence of mind, the same aptitude for introspection as the reviver of his argument, Descartes, and as a philosopher of religion, he has the advantage of the modern thinker and a far richer and more thorough religious experience with which to start. The story of the composition of the Proslogion is thus told by Anselm's companion and biographer, the monk Edemer. After this, it came into his mind to inquire whether it would be possible to demonstrate by one short argument alone what is believed and taught concerning God, namely, that he is eternal, unchangeable, almighty, everywhere wholly present, incomprehensible, righteous, gracious, merciful, true, truth, goodness, righteousness, and so forth, and how all these attributes are one in him. And this matter, as he told us, he found one of great difficulty. For the consideration thereof not only often robbed him of appetite and of sleep, but, which vexed him more, distracted the direction of his thoughts to God at matins and at other services of the church. When therefore he perceived this, he could not fully achieve the discovery of that which he sought. He concluded that this train of thought was a temptation of the devil, and strove to dismiss it from his mind. But the more he labored to do this, the more did the thought haunt his mind. And all at once, one night, during the office of nocturnes, the grace of God shone into his heart, and the thing which he sought became plain to his understanding, and filled all his inward parts with an infinite joy and delight. Considering then in himself that the same reasoning, if it were known to others, might be pleasing to them also, he did not grudge them this satisfaction, but wrote down his argument on tablets and delivered them to a brother of the monastery for more careful custody. When some days had passed, he asked this brother for the tablets. Search was made in the place where they had been put by, but they could not be found. The brethren were asked after them, lest one of them should have taken them, but in vain. Nor could anyone be found who acknowledged that he had known anything of them. Then Anselm wrote another discourse concerning the same matter on other tablets, and delivered them to the same brother to be kept more carefully. The brother laid them up in the innermost part of his bedchamber, and the next day, though he had no suspicion of any mischief, found them lying about on the floor in front of his bed, the wax broken into fragments and scattered on every side. The tablets were picked up, the wax collected, and brought to Anselm. He put together the wax, and, though with difficulty, recovered the writing. But fearing lest it should altogether be lost through carelessness, he commanded that it should be transcribed on parchment in the name of the Lord. And so he composed a book, small in bulk, but great in the importance of the wise judgments and subtle reasonings which it contained, and this he called Proslogion, or the Address. For herein he addresses either himself or God throughout. Now this work came into the hands of a certain person, who was not a little dissatisfied with some of the reasoning therein, and thinking it insufficient, desired to refute it. He composed therefore a treatise against it, and wrote it at the end of Anselm's own work. This was then sent to Anselm by a friend, and when he had considered it, he was glad, and thanking his censor, he devised an answer to the censure, and adding that to the treatise which had been sent him, he returned to the friend who had sent it, the censure and the reply together, in the hope that not only this friend, but others who desired to possess his book, would wish it so, that to his own work should be added the censure of his reasoning, and to the censure his own answer thereunto. The critic whose adverse judgment of his treatise Anselm received with such pleasure, showing thereby how far more he was in love with the truth than with his own opinion, is known to have been Guanilo, a monk of Marmoutier, whose work under the title An Apology for the Fool, that is, for the psalmist fool who said, "There is no God," is still found in editions of Anselm following the Proslogion, and followed in its turn by Anselm's rejoinder. To the Proslogion I have added renderings of certain of the meditations, prayers, and letters of Anselm. My choice has been made with a view to the devotion of Anglican Christians of today, for whom this series is primarily intended. I have thus not chosen for translation meditations and prayers, the language of which would be entirely uncongenial to modern Anglican feeling, prayers, for example, addressed to St. Mary or to other saints, but what I have chosen I have given in full. I take this opportunity of acknowledging with grateful thanks the help which I have received in the preparation of this book for the press from my sister, Miss Mildred Webb, and from my friend, Mr. Guy Kendall, of Magdalen College, who read the whole of it in proof. St. Anselm does not appear to me to rank, except in one kind, that of which the Proslogion is an example, among the great masters of devotional literature. His meditations and prayers are often indeed characteristic of their writer. The student of his theological and philosophical works will often notice in them phrases which show how deeply his thought entered into his personal religion and colored its expression. They are in spirit exceedingly free from any taint of superstition. In many of his prayers addressed to saints there is a perfunctoriness and conventionality which show that, while he could use on occasion, without misgiving the language of a view which made of God the image of an earthly king, whose ear might be gained by the means of powerful favorites at court, this kind of devotion remains somewhat external to his inner life, the truer expression of which is found else, where in prayers which breathe a genuinely evangelical spirit of trust in God through Christ alone. Second meditation, which I have included in this selection, is especially admired by Mr. Rule. It is a striking example of medieval piety in one of its most characteristic moods. In it, a profound horror of sin and an intimate sense of personal sinfulness find expression under the vividly realized scriptural imagery of a great assize. Those who are acquainted with the history of Luther will remember how the great thought of justification by faith alone came to him as a deliverance from the spirit of distrustful and unloving anxiety which was a natural temptation of the monastic life. Isolated from the ordinary occupations, duties, and trials of human life, spending much time in self-examination, inspired with the ambition to exemplify as perfectly as possible in his own person a certain somewhat one-sided ideal of living, which was deliberately regarded as an ideal in itself higher than that of the secular Christian, the earnest religious had much to invite him now to a reliance on his own works, now by reaction to an unrelieved horror of the judgment which must be passed by a perfectly just judge on an obedience so imperfect as self-examination showed him that his was. Thus, the terror of the Lord has perhaps more than its due place in works of the class to which St. Anselm's second meditation belonged. Nevertheless, this fear and horror of judgment is a normal stage in the development of the Christian life. Even where the Christian life has advanced beyond it, the moods of the Christian, like those of other men, are not always on a level with his highest spiritual attainment. The sincere expression of an important part of spiritual experience does not quickly lose its value, even though its form have fallen out of fashion. It has often been remarked that the Middle Ages, in their preoccupation with the thought of Christ as judge, sometimes forgot to think of him as Savior, and therefore devised other mediators to stand between the guilty sinner and his wrath. And many representations of the Last Judgment in art give support to this observation. But however this may be, in this work of St. Anselm's there is no such matter. He flies for refuge only to the judge, who is at the same time his Savior. The same is even more emphatically true of our third, Gerberon's sixth, meditation. This is written in a style more simple than Anselm's is wont to be, but it is well attested for his and is conceived entirely in his spirit. Through whatever changes the language of Christian devotion has passed or is yet to pass, the revelation of God in the life and death of Jesus Christ has been and is to thousands of Christians, as to Anselm here, a revelation at once of sin condemned and salvation freely offered, in the light of which no thought either of the bargaining which derogates from the holiness of God, or of the merit which gives an occasion to human pride, can for a moment find a place. Our fourth meditation, Gerberon's 11th, is thoroughly characteristic of Anselm. In great part, it embodies the doctrine of the atonement, which is set forth at length in his famous theological work, Cur Deus Homo. That doctrine is open to the charge of conceiving the whole matter from a legal standpoint, which gives to the notions connected with the owing and paying of debts an ultimate and absolute value that they cannot possess. It holds, however, an important place in the history of theology by reason of its decided rejection of the views which some have put forward that the death of Christ was a price paid to the devil, or even a trick played upon him. The latter view, Anselm seems clearly to be inconsistent with holding God to be the truth, and it is indeed a low and heathenish notion, already before the days of Christianity condemned by Plato, who made it a canon of theology to attribute no deceitfulness to God. But even the theory that a price due to the devil had to be paid was false, for it gave to the power of evil an independent place over against God, which believers in one God could not consistently concede to it. These theories Anselm rightly puts aside, but his own theory also falls short of what was required in a doctrine of the atonement. It does not turn upon the love of God, but, as was said above, upon a legal conception of his justice. Distinctions between the divine and the human nature, between the Redeemer and the redeemed, are more present to his thought, though not to his feeling, than the unity in which the religious experience of reconciliation and atonement finds them overcome. Yet it must not be forgotten that the Christian sense of forgiveness differs from that which might be enjoyed by one who thought of God as a kindly being who forgets rather than forgives what is done amiss, just in this very point, that for the Christian full justice, as we say, is done to the forgiven sin. It is faced, known, naked, and open to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. Thus forgiven, it is indeed as sin taken away, whereas, were it only passed over and ignored, it might be there still, poisoning the air. We should not really have done with it. A deep sense of sin and a genuine faith in its remission go together. Hence the readiness of the true penitent to bear the punishment of his sin, so he may be rid of the sin. The false penitent desires less to be rid of the sin than to escape the punishment. It is this aspect of the experience of atonement to which Anselm's language about a debt to be paid aims at giving expression. Into the history of these devotional writings of Anselm, I have not thought it my business to enter here. It will be found perhaps most fully treated by Mr. Rule, or in the historical notice, prefixed by Dr. Pusey, to a translation of Meditations and Prayers addressed to the Holy Trinity and our Lord Jesus Christ by St. Anselm, sometime Archbishop of Canterbury, which was published by Parker at Oxford in 1856. I have translated from Gerberon's edition, which is reprinted in Mainz Patrologia Latina. The translation is a new one, but it is not in all cases the first offered to English readers. In 1708, Dean Stanhope of Canterbury published a book called Pious Breathings, being the Meditations of St. Augustine, his treatise of the love of God, soliloquies, and manual, to which are added select contemplations from St. Anselm and St. Bernard. And in 1856 appeared the Oxford translation mentioned above, under the auspices of Dr. Pusey. To this last I have occasionally been indebted for a word or phrase. The devotion of St. Anselm is, of course, the devotion of his age and circumstances. He was a monk, and his Christianity has a monastic cast. Those who use this series for the most part take their share in the occupations of family, social, civil life, and their Christianity is affected by their experience as Anselm's was by his. The tone neither of his Christianity nor of theirs is exactly that of the New Testament. In one point, the Christianity of the Middle Ages and that of our own time are alike contrasted with that of the apostles. Both recognize, ours, however, more completely than that of the Middle Ages, that the scientific life and the political life are spheres in which Christians may be expected to move. In another point, our Christianity is contrasted with the medieval and the apostolic, in that there, and especially in medieval Christianity, the imagination dealt more confidently with the hopes and fears of a future life than is easy or possible for us. But in spite of all this, there is a fundamental likeness among all the products of the Christian spirit. In all, there is a contempt of the world which is not proud or bitter, but humbled by the consciousness of sin and sweetened by the love of Christ. We have much reason to fear the warning addressed to those who say, "Lord, Lord," and do not do the things that he said. But even to say Lord, Lord to Christ is to own a standard and an ideal which are not those of this world. The discontent with what falls short of that standard and that ideal, which it is the function of devotional writing to arouse, is aroused by Anselm in tones which are, as I have already suggested, especially worthy the attention of those whose natural bent is towards philosophical reflection. Two opposite dangers beset such persons: the indulgence in contemplation, which weakens the sense of personal sinfulness, and the fear of consequences, which refuses to follow the argument, in Plato's words, whithersoever it leads us. The study of Anselm, a pattern of humble penitence and of indefatigable intellectual curiosity, should discourage both these perilous tendencies and encourage at once sound thought and genuine devotion. Proslogion, or Address to God Concerning His Existence. Preface. I formerly published, at the insistence of certain of my brethren, a little work in which, assuming the person of one who by silent reasoning with himself is searching for a knowledge he does not yet possess, I gave an example of the manner in which we may meditate concerning the grounds of our faith. But afterwards, when I considered that this work was put together by the interweaving of a great number of arguments, I began to ask myself whether there might not perhaps be found some one argument which should have no need of any other argument besides itself to prove it, and might suffice by itself to demonstrate that God really exists and is the supreme good, which needeth nothing beside itself to give it being or well-being, but without which nothing else can have either the one or the other, and whereof all other things are true which we believe concerning the divine essence. And when, after many times earnestly directing my thoughts to this manner, it sometimes seemed to me that what I sought was just within my grasp, but sometimes that it eluded my mind's sight altogether. At last I resolved in despair to renounce the search for a thing, the discovery whereof was beyond my powers. But this train of thought, so soon as I had desired to lay it aside, lest it should hinder my mind while vainly occupied therein from attending to other matters, which might be more profitable to me, at once began to press itself as if it were importunately upon me, unwilling and reluctant as I was to entertain it. And so one day, when I was wearied out with violently resisting this importunity, in the midst of the struggle of my thoughts, there so presented itself to me the very thing which I had given up hope of finding, that I hastened to embrace that very train of thought which I was but a moment ago anxiously thrusting from me. Thinking, therefore, that if I wrote down what I so greatly rejoiced to have found, it would please others who might read it, I wrote the following little work, treating of this and of some other matters, in the character of one striving to raise his thoughts to the contemplation of God, and seeking to understand what he already believes. And because neither this nor the other treatise, which I mentioned before, seemed to me worthy to be called a book, or to have the writer's name set in the front of it, and yet I thought I must not let them go without some title to invite those to read into whose hands they might come, I gave a name to each, calling the former an example of meditation on the grounds of faith, and the latter faith in search of understanding. But when both had been often transcribed under these titles by diverse persons, was constrained by many, and especially by Hugh, the Reverend Archbishop of Lyons, and legate of the Apostolic See in Gaul, who laid his commands upon me in virtue of his apostolical authority, to prefix my name to them. And so that this might be done more fittingly, I have called the former monologion, that is, the soliloquy, and this prologion, that is, the address. Chapter 1. Come now, thou poor child of man, turn a while from thy business. Hide thyself for a little time from restless thoughts. Cast away thy troublesome cares. Put aside thy wearisome distractions. Give thyself a little leisure to converse with God, and take thy rest a while in Him. Enter into the secret chamber of thy heart. Leave everything without but God and what may help thee to seek after Him. And when thou hast shut the door, then do thou seek Him. Say now, O my whole heart, say now to God, I seek thy face. Thy face, Lord, do I seek. Come now then, O Lord my God, teach thou my heart, when and how I may seek thee, where and how I may find thee. O Lord, if thou art not here, where else shall I seek thee? But if thou art everywhere, why do I not behold thee, since thou art here present? Surely indeed thou dwellest in the light which no man can approach unto. But where is that light unapproachable? Or how may I approach unto it, since it is unapproachable? Or who shall lead me and bring me into it, that I may see thee therein? Again, by what token shall I know thee? In what form shall I look for thee? I have never seen thee, O Lord my God. I know not thy form. What shall I do then, O Lord most high, what shall I do, banished as I am so far from thee? What shall thy servant do that is sick for love of thee, and yet is cast away from thy presence? He panteth to behold thee, and yet thy presence is very far from him. He longeth to approach unto thee, and yet thy dwelling place is unapproachable. He desireth to find thee, yet he knoweth not thy habitation. He would fain seek thee, yet he knoweth not thy face. O Lord, thou art my God, thou art my Lord, and I have never beheld thee. Thou hast created me, and created me anew, and all good things that I have hast thou bestowed upon me, and yet I have never known thee. Nay, I was created to behold thee, and yet have I never unto this day done that for the sake whereof I was created. O miserable lot of man, to have lost that whereunto he was created. O hard and terrible condition. Alas, what hath he lost? What hath he found? What hath departed from him? What hath continued with him? He hath lost the blessedness whereunto he was created, and he hath found the misery whereunto he was not created. That without which nothing is happy hath departed from him, and that hath continued with him, which by itself cannot but be miserable. Once man did eat angels' food, after which he now hungereth. Now he eateth the bread of affliction, which then he knew not. Alas for the common woe of man, the universal sorrow of the children of Adam. Our first father was filled with abundance. We sigh with hunger. He was rich. We are beggars. He miserably threw away that in the possession whereof he was happy, and in the lack whereof we are miserable. After which we lamentably long, and alas, abide unsatisfied. Why did he not keep for us, when he might easily have kept it, that the loss whereof so grievously afflicts us? Wherefore did he so overcloud our day, and plunge us into darkness? Why did he take from us our life, and bring upon us the pains of death? Wretches that we are, whence have we been driven out, and whither? From our native country into banishment, from the vision of God into blindness, from the joy of immortality into the bitterness and horror of death. How sad the change from so great good to so great evil. Grievous is the loss, grievous the pain, grievous everything. But alas for me, one of the miserable children of Eve, cast far away from God. What did I begin, and what have I accomplished? At what did I aim, and unto what have I attained? To what did I aspire, and where am I now sighing? I sought good, and behold, trouble. I aimed at God, and have stumbled upon myself. I sought rest in my secret chamber, and I have found tribulation and grief in the inmost parts. I desire to laugh for gladness of spirit, and am constrained to roar for the disquietness of my heart. I hope for joy, and behold, increase of sorrow. How long, O Lord, how long? How long, O Lord, wilt thou forget us? How long wilt thou hide thy face from us? When wilt thou turn and hearken unto us? When wilt thou enlighten our eyes and show us thy face? When wilt thou restore thy presence to us? Return and look upon us, O Lord. Hearken unto us, enlighten us, show us thyself. Restore to us thy presence, that it may be well with us, for without thee it goeth very ill with us. Have pity upon our labors and strivings after thee, for without thee we can do nothing. Thou callest us, help us to obey the call. I beseech thee, O Lord, that I may not despair in my sight, but may draw full breath again in hope. My heart is embittered by its desolation. With thy consolation I beseech thee, O Lord, make it sweet again. I beseech thee, O Lord, for in my hunger I have begun to seek thee. Suffer me not to depart from thee fasting. I have come to thee fainting for lack of food. Let me not go away empty. I have come to thee as the poor man to the rich, as the miserable to the merciful. Let me not return unsatisfied and despised. And if, before I be fed, I sigh, grant me that, though after I have sighed, I may be fed. O Lord, I am bent downwards. I cannot look up. Raise me up, that I may lift mine eyes to heaven. My iniquities are gone over my head. They overwhelm me. They are like a sore burden too heavy for me to bear. Deliver me, take away my burden, lest the pit of my wickedness shut its mouth upon me. Grant unto me that I may look upon thy light, though from afar off, though out of the deep. I will seek thee with longing after thee. I will long after thee in seeking thee. I will find thee by loving thee. I will love thee in finding thee. I confess to thee, O Lord, and I give thanks unto thee, because thou hast created in me this thine image, that I may remember thee, think upon thee, love thee. But so darkened is thine image in me by the smoke of my sins, that it cannot do that whereunto it was created, unless thou renew it and create it again. I seek not, O Lord, to search out thy depth, but I desire in some measure to understand thy truth, which my heart believeth and loveth. Nor do I seek to understand that I may believe, but I believe that I may understand. For this too I believe, that unless I first believe, I shall not understand. Not only does this something than which no greater can be conceived exist, but it exists in so true a sense that it cannot even be conceived not to exist. For it is possible to form the conception of an object whose non-existence shall be inconceivable, and such an object is of necessity greater than any object whose existence is conceivable. Wherefore, if that than which no greater can be conceived not to exist, it follows that that than which no greater can be conceived is not that than which no greater can be conceived, for there can be thought a greater than it, namely, an object whose non-existence shall be inconceivable. And this brings us to a contradiction. And thus it is proved that that thing than which no greater can be conceived exists in so true a sense that it cannot even be conceived not to exist. And this thing art thou, O Lord, our God. And so thou, O Lord my God, existeth in so true a sense that thou canst not even be conceived not to exist. And this is as is fitting. For if any mind could conceive aught better than thee, then the creature would be ascending above the Creator and judging the Creator, which is a supposition very absurd. Thou therefore dost exist in a truer sense than all else beside thee, and art more real than all else beside thee, because whatsoever else existeth in a less true sense than thou, and therefore is less real than thou. Why then, said the fool in his heart, there is no God, when it is so plain to a rational mind that thou art more real than anything else? Why, except that he is a fool indeed? Chapter 4. But how came the fool to say in his heart that which he could not conceive? Or how came he to be able not to conceive that which yet he said in his heart? For it may be thought that to conceive and to say in one's heart are one and the same thing. If it is true, nay, because it is true, that he conceived it, because he said it in his heart, and also true that he did not say it in his heart because he could not conceive it, it follows that there are two senses in which something may be understood to be conceived or said in the heart. For in one sense we are said to have a conception of something, when we have a conception of the word that signifies it, and in another sense when we understand what the thing really is. In the former sense, then, we may say that God is conceived not to exist, but in the latter he cannot by any means be conceived not to exist. For no man that understandeth what fire and water mean can conceive that fire is really water, though he may have this conception as far as the words go. Thus, in like manner, no man that understandeth what God is can conceive that God does not exist, although he may say these words, that God does not exist, either with no meaning at all, or with some other meaning than that which they properly bear. For God is that than which no greater can be conceived. He who well understandeth what this is, certainly understandeth it to be such as cannot even be conceived not to exist. Whosoever therefore understandeth in this way that God exists, cannot conceive that he does not exist. Thanks be to thee, O good Lord, thanks be to thee, because that which heretofore I believed by thy grace, I now by thine illumination thus understand, so that even though I should not wish to believe in thine existence, I cannot but understand that thou dost exist. Chapter 5. What then art thou, Lord God, thou than which nothing greater can be conceived? What indeed but that supreme good, which being alone of all things self-existent, didst make all other things beside thee out of nothing? For whatsoever is not this is less than can be conceived. But thou canst not be conceived to be less than the highest conceivable. What good thing is lacking to the supreme good, whereon depends the being of every good thing beside? Thou therefore art righteous, true, blessed, and hast all attributes, which it is better to have than to be without. For it is better to be righteous than not righteous, and blessed than not blessed. Chapter 6. But since it is better to have perception, or to have omnipotence, to be pitiful or to be without passions, than not to have these attributes, how hast thou perception, if thou art not a body? Or omnipotence, if thou canst not do everything? Or how art thou at one and the same time pitiful and without passions? For if only bodily things have perception, since the senses with which we perceive belong and attach to the body, how canst thou have perception, since thou art not a body, but the Supreme Spirit, which is higher than a body can be? But if perception is only knowledge or a means towards knowledge, since he who perceives has knowledge thereby, according to the special character of the senses, by sight of colors, by taste of savors, and so forth, then whatsoever has knowledge, in whatsoever manner may be said, without impropriety in some sense to perceive. Therefore, O Lord, although thou art not a body, yet of a truth, thou hast in this sense perception in the highest degree, since thou knowest all things in the highest degree, but not in the sense wherein an animal that has knowledge by means of bodily feeling is said to have perception. Chapter 7. But again, how canst thou be omnipotent, if thou canst not do all things? Yet if thou canst not suffer corruption, canst not lie, canst not make what is true to be false, or what is done undone, and so forth, how canst thou do all things? Or shall we say that to be capable of these would be not power, but rather impotence? For he who cannot do these can do what is not expedient for him, and what he ought not, and the more he can do what is not expedient for him and what he ought not, the more power have evil and wickedness over him, and the less power hath he against them. He therefore that can do such things can do them in virtue, not of power, but of impotence. For he is said to be able to do them, not because he himself has power in doing them, but because his impotence gives something else power to work in him, or else, in an improper way of speaking, such as we often use when we put to be for not to be, and to do for not to do, or to do nothing. For we often say to one who says that a thing is not such and such, it is as you say it is, when it would seem more proper to say, It is not as you say it is not. Again we say, this man sits as that man does, or this man rests as that man does, though sitting is a kind of not doing, and resting is doing nothing. Thus then, when a man is said to have the power of doing or undergoing what is not expedient for him, or what he ought not, the word power signifies impotence, since the more power of this sort he hath, the more power have evil and wickedness against him, and the less hath he against them. Therefore, O Lord God, thou art all the more truly omnipotent, that thou canst do nothing that is done through impotence, and nothing hath any power against thee. Chapter 8. Once again, how art thou at the same time pitiful, and yet without passions? For unless thou have passions, thou wilt not have compassion. If thou hast not compassion, thy heart is not made sorry by compassion, that is, by fellow feeling with the sorrowful. And this is what pity is. Yet, if thou art not pitiful, whence have the sorrowful so great consolation from thee? How then canst thou at once be and not be pitiful, O Lord, unless because thou art pitiful in respect of us, and art not pitiful in respect of thyself? For thou art pitiful to our apprehension, and art not pitiful to thine own. For when thou hast respect to us in our sorrow, we perceive the effects of pity, but thou feelest not the emotion thereof, and thus thou art pitiful in that thou savest the wretched, and sparest those that sin against thee. And yet again thou art not moved by a fellow feeling with our misery. Chapter 9. Again, how dost thou spare the wicked, if thou art holy and supremely just? For how dost thou, being holy and supremely just, do aught that is not just? And what manner of justice is that, to give eternal life to one that deserves eternal death? Whence then, O good God, good both to the good and to the evil, whence is it that thou savest the evil? If to save the evil is not just, and yet thou dost nothing that is not just? Or is it because thy goodness is incomprehensible that this lieth hid in that light unapproachable, which is thy dwelling place? Verily, it is in the most deep and secret abyss of thy goodness that there lieth hid the fountain, whence floweth the river of thy mercy. For though thou art holy and supremely just, yet art thou also gracious to the wicked, because thou art holy and supremely good. For thou wouldest be less good, if thou wert not gracious to any that was evil. For better is he who is good both to the good and to the evil, than he who is good to the good only. And better is he who is good to the evil, both in punishing and in sparing them, than he who is good in punishing them only. Therefore thou art pitiful, because thou art holy and supremely good. And although perchance we suppose that we see reason why thou dost reward good to the good and evil to the evil, yet certainly we must be filled with wonder why thou, being holy and supremely just, and having need of nothing, renderest good to the evil, and those who have sinned against thee. O the depth of thy goodness, O God! We both see whence thou art merciful, and yet see it only in part. We perceive whence the river flows, yet behold not the fountain from which it springs. For it is of the plenitude of thy goodness that thou art kind to them that have sinned against thee. And yet it lieth hid in the depth of thy goodness, wherefore this is so. Verily, although it is in thy goodness that thou rewardest good to the good, and evil to the evil, yet this the rule of justice seems to require. But when thou rewardest good to the evil, then we know that the supremely good willed to do that, yet wonder that the supremely just was able so to will. O thou mercy of God, from how abundant a sweetness, from how sweet an abundance flowest thou forth unto us. O boundless goodness of God, how ought we sinners to be moved by love of thee? For thou savest the just, justice assenting, but deliverest the wicked, when justice condemns them. Thou savest the just by the help of their deserts. Thou deliverest the wicked against their deserts. Thou savest the just, acknowledging in them the good which thou didst give them. Thou deliverest the wicked, pardoning the evil which thou hatest. O immeasurable goodness, passing all understanding, let that mercy be shed upon me which proceedeth from the great riches of that goodness. Let there flow into me that mercy which floweth out of that goodness. Spare in thy mercy, and take not vengeance in thy justice. For although it be hard to understand how thy mercy is not parted from thy justice, yet it is necessary to believe that it is not at enmity with thy justice, that it floweth from thy goodness, that it is not without justice, nay, in truth, accordeth with thy justice. For if thou art merciful only because thou art supremely good, and art supremely good only because thou art supremely just, therefore art thou in truth merciful because thou art supremely just. Help me, O just and merciful God, for I seek thy light. Help me that I may understand what I say. Verily then thou art merciful because thou art just. Is then thy mercy born of thy justice? Dost thou then out of justice spare the wicked? If it be so, O Lord, if it be so, teach me how it is so. Is it because it is just that thou shouldest so be good that thou couldst not be conceived better, and shouldest work so mightily that thou couldst not be conceived mightier? For what is juster than this? Yet this would not be if thou wert good in punishing only, not in sparing. And if thou madest them good only that were merely not good, and not also those that were evil. And so it is just that thou shouldest spare the wicked, and make them that were wicked to be good. Lastly, what is not done justly ought not to be done, and what ought not to be done is done unjustly. If then thou dost not have mercy on the wicked justly, then thou hast mercy on them unjustly. And since it were blasphemy to say this, it is fit to believe that thou hast mercy on the wicked justly. Chapter 10. But it is also just that thou shouldest punish the wicked. For what is more just than that the good should receive good things, and the evil, evil things? How then is it just for thee both to punish the wicked, and also to spare them? For when thou dost punish the wicked, it is just, because it is agreeable to their deserts. But when thou sparest them, it is just also, because though it befitteth not their deserts, yet it befitteth thy goodness. For in sparing the wicked, thou art just in respect of thyself, though not in respect of us, just as thou art pitiful in respect of us, and not in respect of thyself, since in saving us, whom thou mightest justly destroy, thou art pitiful, not that thou art thyself moved by the feeling of pity, but that we feel the effect of pity. And in the same manner thou art just, not that thou hast rendered to us what we have deserved, but that thou dost what becometh thee, the supremely good. Thus dost thou, without contradiction, punish justly and justly spare. Chapter 11. But is it not also just even in respect of thyself, O Lord, to punish the wicked? For it is just that thou shouldest be so just as no man could conceive thee juster. And this thou wouldest by no means be, if thou didst only render good to the good, and not evil to the evil. Far juster is he that rewards the good and evil alike according to their deservings, and not the good only. And so thou art just in respect of thyself, O just and gracious God, both when thou punishest and when thou sparest. Verily then all the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth, and yet the Lord is just or righteous in all his ways, and that without contradiction, since those whom thou dost will to punish, it is not just should be saved, and those whom thou dost will to spare, it is not just should be condemned. For that alone is just, which thou dost will, and that not just, which thou willest not. Thus then is thy mercy born of thy justice, because it is just that thou shouldest be so good as to be good even in sparing. And this is perchance why the supremely just can will good to the evil. But if it can at all be apprehended why thou wilt to save the wicked, certainly that can by no means be comprehended, why among those alike wicked thou savest these rather than those, by thy supreme goodness, and condemnest those rather than these, by thy supreme justice. Thus then hast thou indeed perception and omnipotence, art pitiful, and yet without passion. And thou hast life, wisdom, goodness, blessedness, eternity, and whatsoever other attributes it is better to have than not to have. Chapter 12. But certainly, whatsoever thou art, this thou art reason of nothing else outside of thyself. Thou therefore art the life whereby thou livest, and that wisdom whereby thou art wise, and that very goodness whereby thou art good both to the good and also to the evil, and so with the rest of thine attributes. Chapter 13. But everything which is anyhow comprehended in place or time is less than that which no law of place or time restraineth. Since then there is nothing greater than thou, no place or time comprehendeth thee. But thou art everywhere and always, and of thee alone can it be said, thou alone art uncircumscribed and eternal. How then are other spirits called uncircumscribed and eternal? Thou indeed art alone eternal, because thou alone of all beings neither beginnest nor ceasest to be. But how art thou alone uncircumscribed? May we say that the created spirit, in comparison of thee, is circumscribed, though in comparison of the body, uncircumscribed? For the body is altogether circumscribed, since it is altogether in some certain place, and cannot be at the same time in any other. And this we see only in what is of the nature of body. That again is uncircumscribed, which is altogether in all places at the same time. And this is conceived to be true of thee only. But that is at once circumscribed and uncircumscribed, which being wholly in some certain place, can be at the same time wholly elsewhere. And this we know to be true of created spirits. For if the soul were not wholly in every member of its body, it would not be able wholly to have feeling in every member. Thou then, O Lord, art in a sense, wherein it is true of nothing else, at once uncircumscribed and eternal, and yet other spirits also are uncircumscribed and eternal. That is, when I feel, for example, a pain in my forefinger, it is I that feel it. I am not conscious of a division in my consciousness. The body is divided into parts, but not the consciousness. The finger has not a consciousness of its own, distinct from that of the next finger. But I, one and the same consciousness, am conscious of feelings now in one finger, now in another. This remains true, notwithstanding the facts now known, but unknown, which show that particular kinds of consciousness are connected with particular parts of the brain. So that injury to or removal of a particular part of the brain makes one incapable of a certain kind of consciousness. For despite this fact, the consciousness is not divided into parts, one outside of another. The consciousness is one at each moment. The division into parts, one outside of the other, is only true of the brain, which by experiments, not by immediate consciousness, we find to be bound up with our consciousness. We are not directly conscious of our brains at all. And for many centuries it was held to be uncertain whether the brain was the organ of consciousness or not. Chapter 14. Hast thou then found, O my soul, that which thou wast seeking? Thou wast seeking God, and thou hast found that he is that thing which is supreme among all things, than which nothing better can be conceived, and that this is very life, light, wisdom, goodness, eternal bliss, and blissful eternity, and that this is everywhere and always. For if thou hast not found thy God, how can he be this which thou hast found, and which thou hast with so certain an assurance, so assured a certainty, understood him to be? But if thou hast found him, why dost thou not perceive that which thou hast found? Why doth my soul not perceive thee, O Lord God, if she hath found thee? Hath she not found thee, whom she hath found to be light and truth? Or could she understand anything at all concerning thee, except by thy light and truth? If then she hath seen light and truth, she hath seen thee. If she hath not seen thee, she hath seen neither light nor truth. Or is it rather that that which she hath seen is indeed both truth and light, and yet she hath not yet seen thee, because she hath seen thee in part only, but hath not seen thee as thou art? O Lord my God, my Creator and Renewer, tell my soul that longeth after thee, what else thou art besides what she hath seen, that she may see clearly that after which she longeth. She stretcheth out herself that she may see more, and yet seeth nothing beyond what she hath seen, except mere darkness. Nay, she seeth not darkness, for in thee is no darkness. But she seeth that she can see no farther, because of the darkness which is in herself. Wherefore is this, O Lord? Wherefore is this? Are her eyes darkened by her own infirmity, or are they dazzled by thy splendor? Surely she is both darkened in herself and dazzled by thee. Thus also she is darkened by reason of her own littleness, and overwhelmed by reason of thine immeasurable greatness. She is straitened by her own narrowness, and vanquished by thy vastness. For how great is that light, whereby every truth shineth, that doth enlighten the rational intelligence? How vast is that truth, wherein is contained everything that is true, and outside whereof is only nothingness and falsehood. How immeasurable is that vision, which beholdeth in one glance all things that have been created, and whence, and by whom, and how they were created out of nothing. What purity, what simplicity, what clearness and splendor is there! Surely more than can be comprehended by any creature. Chapter 15. Therefore, O Lord, not only art thou than that which no greater can be conceived, but thou art something greater than can be conceived. For because there may be conceived to be something greater than can be conceived, if thou art not that something, there may be conceived something greater than thee, which is impossible. Chapter 16. Verily, O Lord, this is the light unapproachable, wherein thou dwellest. For of a truth there is nothing beside thyself that can enter into that light, there to behold thee in thy fullness. Verily then I see not that light, for it is too great for me. And yet whatsoever I see by means of that light, even as a weak eye seeth what it doth see by means of the sun's light, yet cannot look upon that light as it is in the sun himself. My understanding cannot attain to that light unapproachable. It is too bright for it. It taketh it not in, nor can my soul's eye bear long to be directed toward it. It is dazzled by the brightness, vanquished by the vastness, overwhelmed by the immensity, confounded by the compass thereof. O supreme and unapproachable light, O entire and blessed truth, how far off art thou from me, who am so near to thee? How far removed art thou from my sight, who am wholly present to thine? Thou art everywhere wholly present, yet I see thee not. In thee I move, in thee I have my being, yet can I not approach unto thee. Thou art within me and about me, yet I perceive thee not. Chapter 17. Hitherto, O Lord, thou art hid from my soul in thine own light and bliss, and therefore she goeth up and down in her darkness and misery. For she looketh about her, and beholdeth not thy beauty. She listeneth, and heareth not thy harmony. She smelleth, and perceiveth not thy sweetness. She tasteth, and hath no sense of thy goodness. She toucheth, and feeleth not thy smoothness. For thou hast all these, beauty to the sight, harmony to the ear, sweetness to the smell, goodness to the taste, smoothness to the touch, all in thee, O Lord God, in thine own ineffable way, since it is thou who hast granted to sensible things to have them in their own way which our bodily senses perceive, but the senses of my soul are stiffened and dulled and obstructed by the long sickness of sin. Chapter 18. And once more behold, trouble. So once more cometh sorrow and grief to me that sought after joy and gladness. My soul hoped but now to be fulfilled, and behold, once more is she bowed down by want. I sought to eat and be satisfied, and lo, I am more hungry than before. I strove to rise up into the light of God, and have fallen back into mine own darkness. Nay, not only have I fallen into the darkness, but I perceive myself encompassed about thereby. I fell into it before my mother conceived me. Surely I was conceived in darkness, and was born under the shadow thereof. Surely we all fell in him, in whom we all have sinned. We all lost in him who might easily have kept it, and lost it to his own sorrow and ours. That which, when we desire to seek, we know not. When we seek, we find not. When we find, is not that which we seek. Help me then, according to thy goodness. Lord, I have sought thy face. Thy face, Lord, will I seek. O hide not thou thy face from me. Raise me up out of myself unto thee. Cleanse, heal, quicken, and lighten the eye of my mind, that it may look upon thee. Grant that my soul may collect her strength once more, and with all the power of her understanding strive after thee, O Lord. What art thou, O Lord? What art thou? How shall my heart understand what thou art? Surely thou art life, and wisdom, and truth, and goodness, and blessedness, and eternity, and everything that is truly good. These indeed are many, but my narrow understanding cannot see so many good things in one apprehension at one and the same time, so as to be delighted by the presence of all at once. How then, O Lord, art thou all these? Are they parts of thee, or is rather every one of these wholly what thou art? For whatsoever is composed of parts is not in all respects one, but in a certain respect many and diverse from itself, and either actually or in thought can be dissolved. But to be many and not one, or to be capable of dissolution even in thought, is far from thy nature, since thou art that than which no better can be conceived. Thus there are no parts in thee, O Lord, nor art thou many and not one, but thou art one and the same with thyself, so that in nothing art thou unlike thyself. Nay, rather, thou art very oneness, indivisible by any understanding. Therefore life and wisdom and thine other attributes are not parts of thee, but are all one, and every one of them is wholly what thou art, and what the other attributes are. And as thou hast no parts, so neither is thine eternity, which is thyself, at any place or time a part of thee or of thy whole eternity. But thou art wholly everywhere, and thine eternity is wholly at all times. Chapter 19. But if thou wast, and art, and shalt be by reason of thine eternity, and past being is other than present being, and present being than past or future being, how can thine eternity be said to be wholly at all times? Or shall we say that nothing has passed away from thine eternity so as now not to be, though once it was, nor anything to come, as though it were not as yet? Thou then wert not yesterday, nor shalt be tomorrow, but yesterday and today and tomorrow thou art. Nay, not even art thou yesterday and today and tomorrow, but thou art, without any qualification, apart from all time. For yesterday, today, and tomorrow are distinctions in time. But thou, although nothing is without thee, art nevertheless thyself neither in place nor in time, but all things are in thee. Nothing comprehendeth thee, but thou comprehendest all things. Because if the divine eternity be thought of merely as a continual passing of time which did not begin and will not end, it will be made up, just as time is, of successive parts of duration, which cannot be all there at once. Chapter 20. Thou therefore dost fill and embrace all things. Thou art before and beyond all things. And indeed, thou art before all things, because before they were made, thou art. But how art thou before all things? For in that manner, art thou beyond those things which are to have no end? Is it because they can in no wise be without thee? But thou, even though they should return into nothingness, no less art? In this way, then, thou art in a manner of speaking beyond them. Or is it again because they can be conceived of as having an end, but thou canst not? For in this way indeed they have in some sense an end, but thou in no sense. And certainly that which in no sense hath an end is beyond that which in any sense hath an end. Dost thou then thus also transcend all things, even though they be eternal, in that thine eternity and theirs is present to thee in their entirety, while they have not yet that part of their eternity which is to come, as they have no longer that part which is past? Thus thou ever transcendest them, both in that thou art always present to them, and because that is ever present to thee, whereunto they have not yet come. Chapter 21. Is this what we call the age of the age, or the ages of the ages? For just as the age of time comprehendeth all things that are in time, so thine eternity comprehendeth the very ages of time themselves. And it is indeed rightly called an age, because it is one and indivisible, but also ages, because of the boundless immensity thereof. And although thou art so great, O Lord, that all things are full of thee and are in thee, yet thou art such, without being in space, so that in thee there is neither middle, nor half, nor any other part. Chapter 22. Thou therefore alone, O Lord, art what thou art, and who thou art. For what is one thing in the whole, and another in the parts, and has in it anything subject to change, is not in all respects what it is. And whatsoever was not, and begins to be, can be conceived not to be. And except something other than itself maintain it in existence, returns into nothingness, and has a past self, which is not what now is, and a future self, which it as yet is not. That can only be said to exist in a secondary and relative sense. But thou art what thou art, because whatsoever thou art at any time or in any way, that thou art wholly and always. And thou art who thou art in the primary and unqualified sense of the words, because thou hast neither a past self nor a future self, but only present self. Nor canst thou be conceived as at any time not existing. Moreover, thou art life and light and wisdom and blessedness and eternity, and many other such like good things, and yet art but the one supreme good, in all respects sufficient to thyself, and needing none beside thee, while all things beside thee cannot without thee have either being or well-being. Chapter 23. This good art thou, O thou God the Father, this good is thy word, that is, thy Son. For there can be nothing else in the word whereby thou utterest thyself but what thou art, nor anything greater or less than thou art, because thy word is as true as thou art truthful. And therefore he is as thou art, the very truth, not another truth than thyself, and thou art so utterly without complexity in thy nature, that of thee there cannot be born anything that is other than what thou thyself art. This same good is the one mutual love which is between thee and thy Son, that is, the Holy Spirit proceeding from both. For the same love is not unequal to thee or to thy Son, because thou lovest thyself and him, and he himself and thee with a love as great as thou art and as he is. Nor can that be other than thou, and than he which is not unequal to thyself and to him, nor from thy supreme simplicity of nature can there proceed anything which is other than that from which it proceedeth. But that which each person is, that the whole Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, is at once, because each by himself is nothing else than the supremely simple unity and the supremely one simplicity, which cannot be multiplied, nor can be now one thing and now another. For there is one thing necessary, And doubtless this is that one thing necessary, that wherein all good, nay rather, which is all good, the one wholly and solely good. Chapter 14. Arouse thyself, O my soul, and stir up thine understanding, and consider so far as thou canst what and how great is this good. For if particular good things are delightful, consider earnestly how delightful must be that good which comprehendeth the pleasantness of all particular goods, and that in a pleasantness not such as we have known by experience in things created, but surpassing that no less than the Creator surpasseth the creature. For if the life that is created be good, how good must be the life that createth? If health that is made be pleasant, how pleasant must be that health that is the cause of all health? If the wisdom be desirable that consisteth in the knowledge of things created, how desirable must be the wisdom that wrought all things of nothing? Lastly, if there be many great delights in things delightful, what manner of delight and how great must these be in him who made those very things themselves that are so delightful? Chapter 25. Who shall enjoy this good? And what shall he have? And what shall he lack? Surely whatsoever he wisheth he shall have, and whatsoever he wisheth not he shall be without. For there shall be goods of body and of soul, such as eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man to conceive. Why then, poor child of man, dost thou wander hither and thither, seeking the goods of thy soul and body? Love the one good wherein all goods, and it sufficeth thee. Set thy desires upon that uncompounded good which is all good, and it is enough. For what dost thou love, O my flesh? What dost thou desire, O my soul? If beauty delight thee, the righteous shall shine forth as the sun. If swiftness, or strength, or freedom of body, which nothing may hinder, they are as the angels of God, because it is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. Spiritual, that is, in powers, not in nature. If a long life of health, there is an eternity of health, for the righteous live for evermore, and the health of the righteous cometh of the Lord. If abundance, they shall be satisfied when the glory of God shall appear. If drunkenness, they shall be made drunken with the plenteousness of God's house. If melody, there shall the choirs of angels sing together unto God forever and ever. If any pleasure, so it be but chaste, thou shalt give them drink of thy pleasures as out of the river. If wisdom, the very wisdom of God shall manifest itself to them. If friendship, they shall love God above themselves, and one another as themselves. And God shall love them more than they love themselves. For they shall love him and one another in him, and he shall love himself and them in himself. If concord, they shall all have one will, for they shall have no will, but God's will only. If power, they shall be almighty to do their own wills, even as God to do his. For as God shall be able to do what he willeth through his own power, so shall they be able to do what they will through his power. Since, as they will nothing else but what he wills, so he shall will whatsoever they will, and whatsoever he willeth cannot but be. If honor and riches, God shall set his good and faithful servants over many things. Yea, they shall be called sons of gods, and gods. And where his Son shall be, there also they shall be, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If true security, certainly they shall be all sure that those goods, or rather that good, shall never and in no wise fail them, as they shall be sure that they will not lose it of their own free will, and that God, their lover, not take it against their wills from them that love him, and that nothing mightier than God will separate God and them against their wills. But what manner of joy and how great a joy must there be, where there is such and so great a good? O thou human heart, thou hungry heart, thou heart acquainted with sorrow, nay, overwhelmed by sorrow,
How wouldest thou rejoice if thou didst abound in all these goods? Look into thine heart, and ask it whether it could contain the greatness of the joy which it would have, did it possess so great happiness. Yet surely if another whom thou didst love altogether as well as thyself were to have the same happiness, thy joy would be doubled, since thou wouldest rejoice for him no less than for thyself. But if 2 or 3 or many more should have the same happiness, thou wouldst rejoice as much for each as for thyself, didst thou love each as thyself. Therefore, in that perfect mutual love of innumerable blessed angels and men, where none loveth another less than himself, each will rejoice no less for every other than for himself. If then the heart of a man can scarce contain the joy he will have in himself in one enjoyment of so great a good, how shall it be capable of so many and so great joys? And since every man rejoiceth in the good of any in proportion as he loveth him, as in that perfect felicity everyone will love God beyond all comparison, more than he loves himself and all his fellows, so will he rejoice beyond all measure, more in the felicity of God than in his own, and that of all his fellows. But if they so love God with their whole heart, their whole mind, their whole soul, yet so that the whole heart, the whole mind, the whole soul shall not suffice to the excellency of the love, it will follow that they shall so rejoice with their whole heart, their whole mind, their whole soul, that their whole heart, their whole mind, their whole soul shall not suffice to the fullness of their joy. Chapter 26, conclusion of the Proslogion, followed by arguments for the Proslogion by Clement C.J. Webb, editor. O my God and my Lord, my hope and the joy of my heart, tell my soul if this be the joy whereof thou sayest unto us by thy Son, ask and ye shall receive, that your joy may be full. For I have found a joy that is full, and more than full. For when heart and mind and soul and the whole man are full of that joy, yet shall the joy abound yet more beyond measure. Therefore that joy shall not wholly enter into them that rejoice therein, but they that rejoice shall wholly enter into that joy. Tell, O Lord, tell thy servant inwardly in his heart, if this be the joy whereunto thy servants shall enter, who shall enter into the joy of their Lord. But assuredly that joy wherein thine elect shall rejoice, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of man. And so I have not yet uttered or conceived, O Lord, the greatness of the joy of thy blessed ones. For their joy shall be as great as their love, and their love as their knowledge. How great shall be their knowledge of thee, O Lord, and how great their love of thee. Surely in this life eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of man, to conceive the greatness of their knowledge and love of thee in the life to come. I pray thee, O God, let me know thee and love thee, so that I may rejoice in thee. And if I cannot know thee, love thee, rejoice in thee fully in this life, let me go forward from day to day, until that knowledge, love, and joy at last may be full. Let the knowledge of thee grow in me here, and there be made full. Let the love of thee increase in me here, and there be full, so that my joy may here be great in hope, and there full in fruition. O Lord, by thy Son thou dost command, nay, counsel us to seek, and dost promise to accept us, that our joy may be full. I seek, O Lord, that which by thy wonderful counselor thou counselest us to seek. I will accept that which thou dost promise by thy truth, that my joy may be full. O thou faithful God, I seek, grant that I may receive, that my joy may be full. Meanwhile may my mind meditate thereon, may my tongue talk thereof, may my heart love it, my mouth utter it, my soul hunger after it, my flesh thirst after it, my whole substance long for it, until I enter into the joy of my Lord, three persons in one God, blessed forevermore. Amen. Note on the argument of the Proslogion by Clement C.J. Webb, editor. The argument which Anselm embodied in the Proslogion may thus be stated. Whoever speaks of God, even if only like the fool in the Psalms to say there is no God, must, if he is not content to use words without any meaning at all, attach some sense to the word God. Now the sense in which, as a matter of fact, this word is used, as well by those who deny as by those who affirm the real existence of what is denoted in this, that than which no greater can be conceived, whoever asserts, however, that this does not exist, involves himself in a plain contradiction. For in asserting that than which no greater can be conceived does not exist, he implies at once that he can conceive something greater, namely, that which, beside being all that this conceived to be, shall also be real. It would lie outside my present task to discuss this argument at length, but as the reader may fairly ask what is thought of the argument by those who make the criticism of such reasonings their business, I will now add a few observations to what I have already said in the introduction. I shall not indeed state in detail whether this or that philosopher accepted it or rejected it, for such a catalogue of views and doctrines is by itself a very barren and unprofitable sort of knowledge. But to mention some of the points on which the criticism of Anselm's argument might fasten, and has been fastened, may well be of use in the way of guidance and suggestion, and this I will do, using technical expressions as little as I can, and assuming as little as I may a previous study of philosophy in my readers. 1. It may be asked, does the argument as it stands prove what it proposes to prove? It is difficult, I think, to deny that it seems to do so, and yet most readers will feel that it leaves them unconvinced. They will be inclined to say of it, as Hume said of Bishop Berkeley's philosophy, that it admits of no answer and produces no conviction. They will suspect some fallacy, some sophistry. They will be sure that it can only be by some trick that they are led so suddenly from the idea or conception of God to belief in his reality, for they are certain that the evidence of reality must be something other than a mere idea. What should it be then? The first answer which suggests itself is probably the evidence of the senses. Seeing is believing, says the proverb, and in many cases this is true. Who can hold a fire in his hand, asked Bolingbroke in Shakespeare's Richard II, by thinking on the frosty Caucasus. And Kant, the greatest of all the unfavorable critics of the ontological argument, suggested that $100 in my pocket are something very different from any thought of such a sum. But then the most important thing about fire is that it should warm us, about dollars, that they should be handled and passed from hand to hand. This is not so with God. No man hath seen God at any time. He is not an object of the senses at all, but of faith. A vision may sometimes be the means by which faith is won, but it is not the vision in itself that assures us. One may see, and yet not believe. They have both seen and hated, said our Lord, both me and my Father. And again it is written, blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed. Anselm, for his part, is quite clear that his argument applies to God only. It is not at all his intention to guarantee by his argument the reality of everything of which we may be said to have an idea. His contemporary critic, Guanelot, thought that the same reasoning would guarantee the existence of a most perfect island. For we can form the idea of such an island really existing, and if the island does not exist, this idea would not be the idea of the most perfect island, since such an island, really existing, would be more perfect still, and we can frame the idea of such an island. But Anselm replied to Guanelot that his reasoning was only applicable to that than which no greater can be conceived. For such a thing must be conceived to be eternal, without beginning or end, and hence it cannot be possible without being real. It is no part of the notion of an island, even of the most perfect, that it should be without beginning or end. Hence, all that our thought of the most perfect island involves is that it is conceivable, possible, that it may exist, or have existed, or be yet to come into existence. But to speak of an eternal object one which has no beginning or end, in this way is absurd. It cannot, if it is not real now, be possible, in the sense that it may have existed in the past, or may yet exist in the future. It can only be possible if it actually exists. I see no flaw in this answer of Anselm's to his critic, but it practically admits the insufficiency of the original statement of the argument. For, as originally stated, the argument does but show that our notion of perfection is one which cannot apply to a mere idea, but only to what is real. It does not, however, prove that there is some real thing to which it applies. The contradiction lies in thinking of it as unreal and yet as perfect. Nothing is said in the original statement of the idea at first proving only the possibility of its object, and proving the reality of its object only in the case where possibility is inconceivable without reality. 2. We may further ask, however, does the argument, if not as originally stated proving what it proposes to prove, yet admit of a statement which would prove it? That is, if we give up the notion that the argument, as originally stated, is by itself sufficient to refute atheism, is it sufficient if we add to it the explanations by which Anselm, replying to Quan Lo was, as we have seen, led to add to it? I think it is, so long as we do not question the claim of thought to be our only criterion of reality. And few do seriously question this claim. We look into a mirror and see a looking-glass room. Do we believe, like Alice in the fairy tale, that we should find ourselves in that room if we could only get through the glass? Certainly not. That, we say, is no real room. It is only a reflection. But why so? We see it as much as we see this room in which we are standing. We see it still, after we have denied that it is real, just as much as we did before. There it is. So is the room on this side of the glass. Where's the difference? We shall find that it is in consequence of the contradictions between them that we do not think them equally real. On this side of the glass, if you stretch out your hand to touch what looks solid, it will feel solid, but if you stretch out your hand to something which looks just the same in the looking-glass room, you will feel only the smooth surface of the mirror. If you press on, you will break the glass, and the image will vanish, not by the interposition of anything, but by the removal of what seemed to be between us and it. You insist, then, that your world shall be free from contradictions. And so, where you find in your everyday experience contradictions between appearances which are alike, you say one is only appearance, a reflection of the other which is real, and so fit both into one harmonious system. It is not otherwise when you rise from the experience of the senses to the higher experience of science. We who believe the Copernican astronomy and suppose that the earth goes round the sun, not the sun round the earth, see the sun rise in the east and set in the west just as plainly as our ancestors did in the days before Copernicus. But we say that this is only appearance. Really, the earth is going round the sun, not the sun round the earth. But why really? Because this way of putting it explains more, makes the whole of experience more harmonious than it would be on any other theory. And when we are not content, even with science, when we indulge ourselves in a faith that, despite the many appearances which are against it, the world is governed by the providence of a good God, we are still, in the name of harmony and consistency, denying equal reality to appearances which yet remain, as they were before, equally apparent, just as we still see the looking-glass room when we are no longer children, and the sun rise when we have been taught to believe in the Copernican system of astronomy. The ontological argument of Anselm, then, is, if properly explained, sound, supposing we assume that thought is the criterion of reality. Or rather, it is just the assertion that thought is this criterion, that the standard by reference to which we test the reality of everything else is a standard which we carry with us, the standard of what satisfies a thought intolerant of imperfection and contradiction, and insisting, where it finds imperfection and contradiction, that it has before it only appearance, and not what can finally approve itself as real, that therefore this is the most real which is the most satisfactory to thought. 3. We may lastly inquire whether the demonstration given by Anselm that our thought implies the assurance of this perfect reality is precisely what Anselm thought it to be, a proof of the existence of the God of religion. As to this, I will briefly say that it does not seem to me to be so. At least there are few men, and perhaps no Christians, who will find in what this argument proves to be real all that they need as an object of religious worship. But Anselm did not intend his Proslogion to be taken apart from his Monologion, to which it is a sequel, even if he thought, as he seems to have thought, that the Proslogion would by itself suffice for the refutation of atheism. That I have ventured here to translate the Proslogion without the Monologion is due to the circumstance that the intention of this selection is not philosophical, but devotional, and that the Proslogion is included in it less as a philosophical argument than as an example to show how philosophical reasoning can be made a religious exercise. But Anselm had in the Monologion already determined his conception of the most real as the conception of the best, that than which no greater can be conceived must be that which our moral consciousness approves as best, for our scale of values is derived from our moral consciousness. Only if an ethical interpretation be given to the conception of the most real will the argument of Anselm lead to the God of religion. But nothing is said of this in the argument itself. For Anselm himself, this interpretation was inevitable. His theology was of the school of Plato, and the goodness of God was its fundamental article. But this article itself must be discussed by philosophy, and while it is doubtful, the argument of Anselm will not be found to bring us whither he intended. The understanding at which he aimed, he reckoned to be a halfway house between faith and vision. It presupposed a faith which could count nothing higher in the world, or out of it, as Kant says, than the good will. And so it could seem to foreshadow the beatitude pronounced on the pure